get started here. Most of this is just for the recording here.
I'll go back there. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate you hanging in there with us while we got some things, some technical difficulties that we're working through. But I really appreciate y'all being here today for our webinar with Eric Sundell as we continue to celebrate Native Plant Month here in Arkansas. This webinar is being recorded, and afterwards, recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So if you go onto YouTube, type in Arkansas Native Plant Society, you'll find this along with our other webinars that we've offered throughout this our Native Plant Month celebration. So we're also having like a silent auction, as I mentioned. If you go to biddingowl.com/AMPS, you'll have a chance to win a variety of items from botany books to Native Plant Society merchandise, native plants, as well as a signed copy of the recently published Tree, Shrubs, and Woody Vines of Arkansas. I'd also like to encourage you to join the Arkansas Native Plant Society, and you can do this online. You go to our website, amps.org/join, I believe is the page to become a member, and you can pay your dues there through the website. I also encourage you to check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/Arkansas Native Plant Society. And if you ever have any questions about the society or any of our happenings or events, feel free to reach out to our Gmail address, amps.president@gmail.com. Just to give a quick plug for the next webinar in our series, this is going to be with Theo Witzel. This is next Saturday, a week from today, on May 22nd at 1 p.m. Theo's going to give a talk on Arkansas's grasslands, the natural history and conservation of these unique habitats. And following that, we're going to have our Ask the Experts Q&A panel discussion, which is going to include Jennifer Ogle, Eric Sundell, and Theo Witzel. So be thinking of any questions you have about native plants or their habitats or anything related to native plants. You can either submit them in advance to amps.president@gmail.com, or you can bring your questions to the live event and we'll ask them to our panelists. So our speaker today is Eric Sundell. Eric has been an Arkansas resident since 1980. He taught botany for 26 years at the University of Arkansas at Monticello. He is the founder of UAM's Sundell Herbarium and was a charter member and past president of the Arkansas Native Plant Society. More recently, Eric edited the 8th revised and color edition of Dwight Moore's Trees of Arkansas, which is published by the Arkansas Forestry Commission in 2014. Today, Eric is going to present for us on the love life of ferns. And with that, I'll hand it over to Eric. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Tell me if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. Welcome to everybody out there in Fernland to the love life of the ferns. As I told Eric, we're rated PG, so this is a family affair, PG 13. And I think if you remember your Botany 101, you may have an unfortunate flashback with this life cycle of the ferns. But if you haven't remembered the fern life cycle recently, I think you'll find this pretty astonishing how this rather ancient group of plants has managed to survive with a life cycle that has several pretty serious handicaps. So let's get started. The ferns and their allies are often called vascular cryptograms. Vascular meaning they've got a plumbing system, and cryptograms meaning hidden marriage. And for quite a while, botanically, the way ferns reproduced was very mysterious. They couldn't figure out exactly where the marriage occurred between a sperm and an egg, or if there was any marriage at all. So here's a typical habitat for temperate zone ferns. This is just the old decaying stump of a yellow birch tree in the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee, a really nice shaded, moist habitat. And that's where temperate zone ferns, with very few exceptions, love to hang out. Oh, forward. Okay. But we don't see many tree ferns, but in fact, the ferns have a wide variety of forms, including trees. And before atriums became popular in hotel lobbies, you would have to go down to southern Florida to the Fairchild Tropical Garden to see a tree fern. Now, luckily, we're able to see them when we go to some doctor's offices and other places. Here they are growing in New Guinea. And they also, interestingly, and in Arkansas, you may know about this, they also have several epiphytic forms, like Spanish moss. They grow not in the soil, but on the branches and in the bark of host trees, not parasites, but epiphytes. And of course, if you're attending this Botany 101 class, you probably know that we do have one species of epiphytic fern in Arkansas, and that's the resurrection fern, which should still be in the genus Polypodium, but apparently somebody needed a project for a PhD degree and they moved it out of that genus. But in the temperate zone, we're familiar with the fern leaf. It looks pretty much like this. And I'll put in here that Thoreau said that God made ferns to show what he could do with leaves. And these beautiful lacy structures very often have this overall form. It's a compound leaf. This would be a leaflet, and typically the leaflet is also divided, sometimes cut right to its own midrib, sometimes just lobed. And this is called pinnate pinnatifid, once pinnate and almost twice pinnate, a typical fern leaf of the temperate zone. Not all ferns have fern leaves. Here's a bird's nest fern, which some of you may have as a houseplant, and here you can see simple leaves. One thing that all of these leaves have in common is their embryological development, and that's the familiar fiddlehead. And here it is in, I think, in what looks like a Boston fern, maybe. And the frond, as it's called, or fern, unfurls. It rolls out like one of those party whistles that you blow into. The vascular cryptograms are indeed vascular. And here's just a cross section of the stem of a bracken fern, just to show you the pipes that they do have. Here's a vascular bundle. This is where the translocation takes place. And these large open cells are the water pipes, and they bring water with dissolved minerals up from the soil. And not as easy to see are the other cells of a typical vascular system, the phloem cells, and these are carrying sugars down from where they're manufactured in the green leaves down to the roots, which live in the dark and can't make their own food. Right here are a batch of fibers which give support to the stem. These are not translocating liquids. So there is bracken fern, but let's get right to the heart of the matter, the love life of a fern. Here's a typical fern of our temperate zone. We have several species in Arkansas look a lot like this. I find the ferns very hard to tell apart, very hard to identify, really. And so some of you out there will probably know better than I which fern this is. I can't remember anymore, but here they are. Here is the standard pinnate pinnatifid frond. And people who grow ferns very often write into Janet Carson and they say, help, my fern has some disease on the undersurface of the leaf. What is it? How can I get rid of it? And she always reassures them that, don't worry, your fern is in fact not only not sick, it's quite healthy and it's reproducing. And reproduction in these ferns starts on the undersurface of the leaf. In some species, you can see it beginning in the spring and summer, but typically it's later in the fall that these structures on the undersurface of a of a leaflet become prominent. And these are the so-called fruit dots. If you remember from your botany class, these are also called sori, S-O-R-I. One is a sorus. And this is where something reproductive is going on. You see a lot of bubbles here. You see a protective coating here. This is called an indusium. And these bubbles, and here's a different set of sori. This is Polypodium, in fact. It probably is our species, Polypodium virginianum from up in the Ozarks. Here are a batch of those sori without the protective covering, just to show you a different way that ferns like to do things. But when we get a close-up microscopic view, each sorus comprises a bunch of little packets or little structures, and then you can also see little yellow dots here and there. What we're looking at is a whole cluster of spore-making boxes, spore-making structures, technically called sporangia. And this is where we'll start the life cycle. Here's a thin section through a leaf, a frond, showing two sori, two of these clusters of sporangia, 1 and 2. Here's the leaf itself, the top of the leaf. Whoop, go back. All right, it jumped for me. Up here is where photosynthesis continues to occur. Sugars are being made, and then some of those sugars are used to bring off this reproductive process. Here's that indusium, that covering that protects the sporangia as they develop, keeps them moist. And let's look at a close-up here. And we can see, here's the indusium, and here are the sporangia that are making the spores. And most of the ferns have this very characteristic structure in the sporangium. This centipede, or I guess millipede-like structure, is a bunch of cells with particularly thick walls, and it runs halfway around, kind of like a crest on the sporangium. And here it ends, you can see in this one. And then there's the other side of the sporangium has very thin-walled cells. And apparently these cells dry as the indusium, the covering, kind of peels back and everything starts to dry out. The cells dry at different rates, and it's these cells of the so-called annulus, the ring. Just to point out, here the same thing is happening at the margin of the leaf. So the sori can be marginal, or they can be on the surface. And here's a familiar fern for many of you. This is the northern Maidenhair Fern. And if you've seen this up close and personal, you know that it develops these little pockets on the edge of the leaf. The margin of the leaf closes over the rest of the leaf, and then in that pocket, these sporangia develop. Here's the epidermis of the Maidenhair Fern. This is protecting the leaf from drying out. It has a waxy cuticle. Here's where sugars are being made, photosynthesis is taking place. Here's where the carbon dioxide is mixing up. But in the meantime, these sporangia are dividing, and their contents are becoming fern spores. And let's take a look at a sporangium here shown with a scanning electron microscope. And you can see, here's that annulus, that thick-walled ring of cells. And you can see the actual three-dimensional form of the sporangium it's kind of a plump wheel. And here are some stray spores that have escaped during the microscopy process. So there's the sporangium. And as that drying takes place, a sudden tear is created between these so-called lip cells, and that flings the sporangium back on its stalk. And then I don't know how it catapults then forward, but the spores are ejected violently into the air, and then breezes will carry them to new sites for possible development, germination and development. Well, the marriage is hidden because if you take an acorn off an oak tree and you plant it, you get an oak tree. If by chance you manage to cultivate some fern spores, you don't get a fern, at least it doesn't look like it. Something quite different grows from these spores. And let's see what's coming up next here. Here are the spores that are wind dispersed with different color stains. Well, here's a spore germinating, and here's another one that has germinated, and they've made a couple of plants. Here's a plant number one, plant number two, and they certainly, just the way Clark Kent doesn't look much like Superman, these don't look much like ferns. Let me see if they develop into something. Let's watch them grow. We used to do this in botany lab. We would buy some pads that were impregnated with fern spores, and then the first lab, the students would wet down the pad and then put a plastic transparent cover over, and that was enough moisture in the pad for things to develop. And eventually they did find some green stuff growing on those pads. Well, if we separate out a single plant from a single spore, it looks like this. Quite a primitive looking plant. We mentioned that the ferns are vascular cryptograms. They're vascular plants with a plumbing system, but you don't see any sign of plumbing here. In fact, the whole thing, this little heart-shaped plant is about as big as your little fingernail. It's about 1 cell thick all throughout most of the body of the plant. There is no epidermis. There's no waxy cuticle to keep it from, to keep it moist. This is quite a vulnerable plant compared to a standard fern. It is absolutely dependent on available moisture in the environment so that it can continue with whatever it means to do. We do see something going on here. There's some little dots, little structures. By the way, here are some these are not roots, but they're called rhizoids, and they bind the little plant to the soil. And this, if you remember from your botany class, this is the prothallus. And like Clark Kent, it's an alter ego kind of to the super fern that we recognize as a fern. If we get this prothallus under higher magnification, let me show you here, we can see that those structures are containers and they've got something inside them. And with a little more, well, here's a thin section of that central portion of the prothallus showing it's about 2 or at most 3 cells thick. And here's one of those structures with its contents. And your botany prof called it an Antheridium. And these little structures inside are going to be released after a good rain or when water is available. And when they are released, it turns out that they can swim. This is not something you would expect a land plant to be doing. Pines don't have a swimming stage, or roses don't have a swimming stage. But it turns out that the morphologists have figured it out. These are the sperm of that little prothallus. And like the sperm in the animal kingdom, they actually swim to find their eggs. They're attracted to eggs chemically. Some sort of chemical in the environment produced by the egg attracts them. Often it's a sucrose gradient, just a bit of sugar in the water on the forest floor, and off they go. Well, it's interesting with this sort of handicap in the struggle for life, when this fern is competing with all of the flowering plants, and all of the conifers, the seed plants, that the ferns have been so successful. There are thousands of species of ferns. Their allies, like the horsetails, are greatly reduced. The club mosses, Lycopodium and its relatives, they're relegated to very, very minor environments, very small sizes. But here come the Fern Sperm. Let's get a load of this. Here comes an electron micrograph of Fern Sperm. I think this is the most spectacular slide in this presentation. It kind of looks like something Han Solo might be piloting out of Star Wars. All the flagella are here, and this is the sperm. And whatever its primitive nervous system is, it is able to detect the whereabouts of the eggs that are at reproductive stage. And in fact, here they are. There's a second kind of sex organ on that same prothallus that makes the egg. And it has a long neck that you can kind of see here. And under higher magnification, here it is. It's got a little bit of a protuberance. Something's happening up here that looks like it might be serious. And it has a central canal which produces enzymes and then releases them. And they're digestive enzymes. And what they do is digest the actual cell that made them into a fluid. And soon enough, the central canal of this female sex organ, and in botany class, it was called an archegonium. This central canal becomes a fluid. It breaks open at the tip of the canal. And here the egg waits for that lucky sperm that is the first to find it. And fertilization occurs right here. But as in the animal kingdom, this is a sperm and an egg, a sperm with one set of chromosomes, an egg with another set of chromosomes. And a new plant forms with two sets of chromosomes, just as in, for example, Homo sapiens. Well, here, if you can notice, here are several of those prothallus plants, but here's something different. This is the new fern. This is the plant that's going to eventually look like the familiar fern. And you can almost make out the veins in the leaf. Here's a stalk of another new leaf, probably from a different fertilization event. And here is a better picture of what's going on. Here's the prothallus. Here are the rhizoids of the prothallus that cling to the ground. And here is even a better picture that shows the very earliest form of the new fern plant. It has a true root coming down into the soil. True root meaning that it has a plumbing system. It has xylem and phloem. Here's the stem that's about to become more active. And here's the first leaf. And here you can really see that it is a vascular plant. It's got veins. And in fact, they are dividing just the way the veins in a ginkgo leaf divide, a very primitive form of venation. So here's the first sign of the spore-making plant that the botanists call the Sporophyte, growing on the gamete-making plant, the sperm and egg-making plant, which is down here. And the new Sporophyte initially will get its energy as a kind of parasite from this prothallus. The prothallus will give it the food it needs just to get it started. But very soon, this Sporophyte is going to outgrow its parent plant. Let's see what's next here. And here they are, the young Sporophyte leaves just getting started. from this basal area where there are, looks like several fern Prothalis plants. Probably the plural is probably Prothali, but I can't remember anymore. And give this a couple of months. Where did that come from? And we've got a new sporophyte plant, a fern that looks like a fern. And let's see if there are any more. Ah, yeah, let's see. Eric, do we have much more time here?
Yeah, you're doing great. Been fine on time.
Well, that ends the love life of the fern part of the show. And then I also mentioned that we would take a quick look at some of the native ferns of Arkansas. And that part of the show starts right here. So I'll just give you a quick survey. I'm not even sure which one this is. I thought I knew, but is this just the Christmas fern getting started? That's what I think it is, but someone can correct me after we all get unmuted. This is my favorite fern. This is a real beauty. This, I think, is the most elegant fern in Arkansas. This is the Ebony Spleen Wart, one of our more common ferns in woodlands. And here is what I think is Southern Lady Fern. And that would be the other really pretty common fern throughout the state. And here you see the pinnate pinnatifid frond, the leaf. The pinna is the fancy fern term for a leaflet. And then the pinnule is the fancy term for a secondary leaflet. Here's our epiphytic fern, the resurrection fern growing. It really likes post oaks down here in central Arkansas. Also does very well on winged elms, but it can show up really anywhere. And even occasionally it creeps down and kind of grows on a rock at the base of the stem. But that's our only higher plant epiphyte in Arkansas. The tropics are just loaded with epiphytes. The orchid family is probably 95% epiphytes in the tropics, but we have one. And some other common ferns. Here's royal fern. I think it's still in, I can't even remember the generic names of these things anymore. Royal fern, and right next door to it is the cinnamon fern. These were, or still are, I'm not quite sure of the taxonomy anymore, they were in the same genus. And both of them are common in wetland habitats, in seeps in Arkansas. You have to catch these reproductive fronds early in the year because they will quickly fade and leave you nothing but the sterile photosynthetic fronds of cinnamon fern. Here, there's a third species, interrupted fern, a third species of Osmunda used to be the genus for all of them. And I'll just stick with that. I'm not sure. I think it's Osmundastrum or something now for some of them. But even interrupted fern, so common in more northern areas in North America, is a rare plant here in Arkansas. This looks like one of our Dryopterus ferns. Wood fern maybe is the common name. And there's that pinnate pinnatifid structure of the frond. And sure enough, I guessed right, that was a Dryopteris. This is Dryopteris marginalis, marginal wood fern, and the name comes from the position of the sori at the margins of these fronds, margins of the pinnules, really. And this is the indusium that is covering the sorus. And these are quite important, not only biologically, but taxonomically. These are critical characters to have for the identification of many, if not most, ferns. So that was marginal wood fern. Here's a really interesting group of ferns, although I'm not sure they're ferns anymore. It's been a while since I've gotten in touch with the up-to-date taxonomy, but we used to call them ferns. This is a rattlesnake fern in the genus Botrychium, and it has what looks like really one frond with a sterile portion and a fertile portion. And the common rattlesnake fern behaves normally. It comes up in the spring. It diebacks later in the heat of the summer. But there are a couple, I may have some photos of them. A couple of these Botrychium species have a kind of like the world of counterpane. They come up not in the spring, but they come up toward the fall when they can better survive our Arkansas climate and just the climate of the Southeast in general. This is one of those winter-loving Botrychium ferns, and I get them confused. I find it almost impossible to tell two of those species apart. But here again, you see this characteristic sterile part of the leaf that makes the food, and the fertile part of the leaf that makes the sporangia in which the spores form. All right, let's see what's next. Here's the other genus in the family that we're talking about, the Ophioglossacea, and this is Ophioglossum literally means snake tongue. And these, believe it or not, are ferns, or at least fern allies, with, again, a sterile portion of the leaf and a fertile portion of the leaf. This is the snake's tongue, a spike of sporangia. And we've got 4 or 5 species in Arkansas, and one is quite common on glades. And in fact, there's a glade-like outcrop right down the block from me, and that glade-loving adder's tongue fern is growing right there beside the road. Here's another one. Don Crank introduced me to these little things. This is a little coin from somewhere in South America, I guess. I don't remember anymore where it came from. But here's another of the adder's tongue ferns. And these are the ones Dale Thomas, retired botanist from Monroe, Louisiana, used to call belly plants. And Don Crank and I and John Simpson used to hunt for these in graveyards and churchyards in February and even earlier sometimes, when there wasn't too much grass or thatch over them and they could get the light they needed. And here's one of them. There are at least three of these tiny species of winter loving ferns, and they're gone by late spring, early summer underground, and they'll be back the next year. Another interesting plant that calls itself a fern, and indeed it is this so-called water clover. This is the genus Marsilia, and you can see it's an aquatic fern with quite a different life cycle, but like the fern, the love life fern that we kind of looked at, like that life cycle, there are 2 different plants that form. One makes spores and the other makes the sex cells. And here it is floating. Those of you in central Arkansas can see this right at Murray Park along the Arkansas River, along the shore. And it's a fun plant to find. Here's the other member of that Marsilia family. This is pillwort. Also, believe it or not a grass, but a fern. And I'll show you the telltale sign is right here. I guess you can see my arrow. That is a fiddlehead. Notice how it's coiled. So the frond in pillwort is just this grass-like single structure. And here are the overwintering structures, these corm-like or potato-like structures. So that's American pillwort, genus Pilularia. A couple of fern allies to show you. Here is horsetail. This is the common species of Equisetum in Arkansas, grows throughout the state. And I think we can show you the cones. Here's a cone starting to form, if not mature. And these are splendid critters. And this particular species, Equisetum hyemalis, I think it is becoming very popular horticulturally. And once you plant it, you've typically got it. And you're going to get more of it. So these are best planted in beds surrounded by concrete where they can't invade other areas. But this is one of our horsetails and our most common species. Horsetails are fern allies, and they were quite prominent during the Carbon Age, the Coal Age, as large trees as well as herbaceous plants. But they are now relegated to very minor roles, and very few species now worldwide. There's the mature cone showing the spore formation. You can see those spores, that little bit of yellow under the cone, and these will germinate, make their own little prothallus. It's not called a prothallus, but their own little gametophyte plant, which looks quite different from the gametophyte of the ferns and different from the spore-making plant, the sporophyte. Another group of fern allies is the club mosses. And these too date back to the age of coal. And when, like the horsetails, these were large trees as well as herbaceous plants. We've got about 4 species of club mosses, maybe 5 or 6 by now. A couple more have been are rare, but can be found. I think we have maybe 6 species in Arkansas. They're very common in the North Woods. Up in Vermont, we had several species that covered the ground in the woods. But here you have to hunt for them. And see if I have, of course, this is the photosynthetic stuff here, the tiny leaves. But at the tips of some of these branches, Sporangia do form. Here's a recently discovered, I think, species in Arkansas. We called it ground pine up in Vermont. And there are several species that look like this. Apparently, I don't know if I can tell them apart, but here are the cones that are starting to form. And those cones will produce spores. These are evergreen. And I remember one year in the woods in Tennessee at Christmas time, these were out and about, probably dormant, but made a very nice collection. As well, that was the genus Lycopodium in this group. And here's the other genus that's not uncommon in the lycophytes, the club mosses. And this one is actually called spike moss. It's the genus Selaginella. And we have a few species also here in Arkansas, especially in southern Arkansas. This one is common. One is called Selaginella eclipes, and there's a second species that I can't tell apart from eclipes. Let me see if, uh-oh. Let's see. Well, I did something to my screen. And I've, hey, Joe. Yeah. I'm getting my expert. I have an expert in the booth with me here. This popped up. How do I get rid of that?
Oh, are you, well, let's see. I think we could go. Well, let's just play it again. I'm not sure if it'll start over.
Ooh.
Try to start from the current slide instead of the beginning.
Yeah, how do we do that? Let's see.
If you go to slideshow, below that, you'll see a slideshow on the underneath the red bar.
There we go.
Oh,
There you go. Okay.
okay. And okay, yeah. So here's Selaginella, and this is a really an interesting plant biologically because it makes two kinds of spores, which I always found fascinating. Let's see if, but whoop.
Oh, that's the end of the slideshow.
Oh, is that it?
That's it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's the end of the slideshow. I see. How do you know? Oh, 52 of 52.
Yeah.
So that, yeah, there we are. We're at the end of the slideshow. And right here are the cones of Selaginella. And under the microscope, we would see two different kinds of cones bearing two, well, yeah, now I can't remember whether the cones are unisexual or just the sporophylls, whether they're mixed in the cones. But that's the other common group of fern allies, like Lycopodium and Selaginella. So now, Eric, I think we're finished
Okay.
with the slideshow, and I guess I'll
compile in some questions that people have put in the chat. Just let me know when you're ready for that, and I can.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. So we pushed stop share, and can you hear me still?
Yep, I can hear you just fine. See, one of the questions, well, one that I had personally was, if you are you able to speak a little bit about the first true trees evolving from tree ferns millions of years ago?
Well, not much.
Okay.
You can. The early tree ferns were mixed with seed plants that were seed ferns, and they too were trees. And in fact, I should mention that there are beautiful fossils of those early ferns, early tree forms of the lycopsids, the club mosses, and the equisetums, the horsetails, at Bates, Arkansas. Don Crank, who was a fern lover and really very knowledgeable, aside from the official botanist, he was probably the most knowledgeable person in Arkansas on ferns. And he took a couple of us to see the surface coal mining operation in Bates, Arkansas, in the Ouachita Mountains, right on the Oklahoma line, where the rocks were just abundant, and almost any rock that you cracked open in the cleavage plains were quite visible. You would find a fern fossil.
Oh.
Fern leaf. Bates, Arkansas.
The one from Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Cole.
Quite like
not local, but yeah, an example probably of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, we had a question. Is it more typical for the Prothalis to be monoecious or dioecious? And this goes back to earlier in the presentation on the fern reproduction.
My knowledge is actually pretty limited, but the standard format that I showed holds for many of the common ferns that we're familiar with, and those are monoecious. They have both sexes, And they do avoid self-fertilization by maturing the different sex organs at different times, so that the sperm doesn't fertilize an egg on the same prothallus typically. But the groups like the horsetails and the lycopsids, the other group we showed, they often do not have photosynthetic prothallus plants, prothalli, but they are at least a lot of them, and I would have to read up on it again, but they're involved with fungi and somehow get their nutrition through a fungal combination.
All right. Another question is, if rattlesnake fern is not technically a fern, what else could it be?
Yeah, this is kind of new for me since I retired. That it was it kind of, I wouldn't say it was demoted, but it may be treated now more like a fern ally than a true fern. I think it's probably the DNA work that kind of like Pluto got kicked out of the planets, but it's still orbiting the sun. We still call the rattlesnake fern a fern, but technically it's much less related to the major group of ferns than was assumed morphologically.
If equisetum was so aggressive, why isn't it more common out in the wild, or at least out in the wild places where, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but Yannick, where Yannick, the person asking the question, lives around Rogers and Fayetteville?
Well, I've seen it in the Ouachita Mountains, where it will get started in and around a creek, and it really does monopolize pretty broad areas. But I haven't been to the New Heifer building recently, but when last time I was there, they were using it as horticulturally, and they had a contained bed in front of the building where they had planted some of the Equisetum hyemalia, and it had spread, or I mean, it was a carpet within that bed, to such a degree that it would surprise me if even chickweed could get started growing in that bed.
Yeah, a lot of places I've seen it, it's been this large colony, it seems like, or at least, good sized colony. I know there's some seems like I've seen over at Lake Atalanta and Rogers. And another question, I think the final question that we have here in the chat is are there any evergreen ferns native to Arkansas? Oh, I'm sorry, I have one more question after this one, but yeah, Grace is wondering about evergreen ferns here in Arkansas.
Christmas fern is evergreen. I know that one, and resurrection fern will come back to life in the winter. So in terms of the seasons, it will unfurl at any season when it has enough water from its limited supply in the cracks and crevices and soil of those cracks and crevices on an oak tree branch. But I can't think of any others.
Marginal wood fern, I believe, is evergreen.
It sure is. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So, and then the book I referenced earlier, Arkansas Ferns and Fern Allies, list which ones are evergreen as well. So if you're curious to find out about other ferns, get a copy of that book. Karen Seal had mentioned that on Amazon it was a used copy. It was pretty pricey, $155. And what I did is I noticed that myself when I wanted a copy, and I just kept checking and checking. And somebody eventually put this copy up for a reasonable price of like $20 or something, and so I snagged it right away. But yeah, it's out of print, and so some of the huge copies can go for quite a bit of money. And one final question, I believe. I don't think. Let's see. Somebody was wanting to hear a little bit about Maidenhair Fern and fine five-fingered fern, even if they aren't ferns?
Well, Maidenhair Fern is a fern. There are two species, southern maidenhair and northern maidenhair, and they're bona fide ferns.
They look very different.
Southern,
Northern and southern.
what's that?
I said northern and southern maidenhair ferns look very different. Like I wouldn't have thought that they would be the same genus, but
Yeah,
I
but
first saw them.
again, they were taxonomically, it was the morphology and not the DNA that placed them in the same genus. Adiantum, I think it is. But I presume the DNA has confirmed the close relationship. They do have very distinctive sori, the fruit dots. They're marginal, and they occur as little pockets on the margin of the leaves. Southern maidenhair, by the way, makes a terrific house plant. We've had the same southern maidenhair for, I think, 20 years, and it just keeps, it's like that battery, it just keeps on ticking.
Wow. So how long do ferns, I mean, is like, some plants I understand have different life spans, some plants live longer than others. I mean, is there a typical lifespan for a fern, like a couple of decades, or do you have them live for long periods of time, like 100 years or more?
Well, you've got me, I don't know.
Okay.
Of course, a lot of them that spread vegetatively can live forever,
Gotcha.
theoretically. I don't know. And typically they do have underground rhizomes. Almost all of them do. Well, that's not so. There are a lot of clump ferns that don't get out of the clump. But of course, any of them with rhizomes would be able to start new plants every year in different areas. And then someone mentioned five-finger fern. I'm not sure I know which one that is. That's not the walking fern, is it? Because there's another one that spreads in a most ingenious way, not with rhizomes, but the tips of the actual fronds are able to root when they touch the ground.
Wow.
And establish new plants.
Interesting.
Okay.
So is that why it's walking, huh?
Right.
Well, we really appreciate you sharing your knowledge, and yeah, this has been a great presentation. I know others have felt the same way. I've seen some comments in the chat box about people really enjoying this. So again, I want to thank you and everyone else for being here today. Again, the recording is going to be placed on our YouTube channel. So if you wanted to go back and rewatch anything, it'll be up there here very shortly. I'll try to get it up there before I leave my office here today. Again, next Saturday, May 22nd at 1 o'clock, Theo Witzel is going to give a great talk on Arkansas's grasslands, on their natural history and conservation. And then after that, we're going to have Eric Sundell back along with Jennifer Ogle and Theo Witzel for an Ask the Experts Q&A panel discussion. So go ahead and be thinking of some questions you want to bring to that to ask the experts. Anything related to native plants. I think between the three of those people that we could probably cover a lot of ground with what we're able to answer. So and if you want to send any questions in advance, feel free to do so. You can send them to me at amps.president@gmail.com. Again, I want to encourage you to go to our website to learn more about the Arkansas Native Plant Society. That is amps.org, and you can join the society on our website and come to our future meetings, which hopefully will be in person before too long. Check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/Arkansas Native Plant Society. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.